She had 19 years on the job when she put her hands on another officer's arm. Cariol Horn was a Buffalo police officer. 19 years of shifts, 19 years of calls, 19 years of wearing the badge and doing what the department asked. She had worked through the nights no one wanted. She had worked the streets that broke younger officers. She had stayed when others left. She was 3 months from her pension, 3 months from 20 years, 3 months from the moment when everything she'd earned became permanent, something the department couldn't take back. November 2006. A domestic disturbance call came through on Walden Avenue. Cariol responded. When she pulled up, other officers were already on scene. The situation looked handled, controlled, the kind of call that ends with paperwork and everyone going home. A suspect was on the ground. His hands were cuffed behind his back. He wasn't resisting. He wasn't fighting. The threat was over. That's what the training said. Once the cuffs go on, the force comes down. But Officer Gregory Kwiatkowski was on top of him. His forearm was locked across the man's throat. The suspect was screaming. He couldn't breathe. His face was pressed into the pavement, the cold ground, the November air. Kwiatkowski's arm tightened. The man's body jerked. His legs kicked. His shoulders twisted. He was trying to get air and couldn't. Other officers stood nearby. They watched. They didn't move. Cariol stood 10 feet away. She had been trained to recognize when force crossed the line. She had been trained that handcuffs changed the equation. A cuffed suspect wasn't a threat anymore. A cuffed suspect on the ground wasn't a danger. The rules were clear. Use of force had limits. This man was cuffed. This man was down. This man was choking. She looked at the other officers. No one was stepping in. No one was pulling Kwiatkowski back. No one was stopping it. The man's voice was getting weaker. His body was slowing down. The fight was leaving him. Not because he'd given up, because he couldn't breathe. Cariol had a choice. She could step back. She could let the scene finish. She could write a report later. The system had procedures for this. Complaints. Internal reviews. Channels that moved slow but moved. She could follow the chain. She could do it the right way. But the man on the ground wasn't going to survive the right way. She moved forward. She reached out. She grabbed Kwiatkowski's arm. She pulled. He came off. The man gasped. Air rushed in. His chest heaved. His body stopped convulsing. He was breathing again. Kwiatkowski spun around. He looked at Cariol. His face changed. He shoved her hard. She hit the ground. Her shoulder hit pavement. Her radio clattered loose. Her uniform tore. He was shouting. She'd assaulted him. She'd interfered. She'd put everyone at risk. Other officers moved between them. Someone called for a supervisor. The scene fractured. Cariol stood up. She didn't say anything. Her hands were shaking, but she kept them still. The man on the ground was still alive. His chest was moving. That was what mattered. But the air had changed. The other officers weren't looking at her the same way. They were looking past her, through her. Kwiatkowski was still yelling. He was saying she'd attacked him, that she'd crossed a line. As sergeant arrived, he asked Kwiatkowski what happened. Kwiatkowski told him. The sergeant asked the other officers. They told him their version. He didn't ask Cariol. She was told to leave the scene, go back to the station. They'd handle it from here. She left. She drove back. She filed her report. She wrote what she'd seen. A handcuffed suspect being choked. An officer using excessive force. Her decision to intervene. She submitted it. She went home. 2 weeks passed. Then the department opened an investigation, not into Kwiatkowski, into her. The allegation was interference. She had used physical force against a fellow officer during an arrest. She had violated protocol. She had endangered other officers. She had acted outside her authority. Cariol tried to explain. She'd seen excessive force. She'd seen a man being choked while his hands were cuffed behind his back. She'd acted to stop it. That was her job. That was what the badge meant. The department didn't see it that way. Kwiatkowski filed official charges. He said Cariol had assaulted him. He said she'd grabbed him without provocation. He said she'd put everyone on scene at risk. He said she'd shown poor judgment. He said she couldn't be trusted. The other officers backed him up. They signed statements. They said Carriol had overreacted. They said Kwiatkowski had the situation under control. They said her interference had created danger where none existed. No one asked about the man on the ground. No one asked why a handcuffed suspect needed a chokehold. No one asked what under control meant when someone couldn't breathe. No one asked if Kwiatkowski had crossed a line first. The hearings began in early 2007. Carriol sat in rooms with department officials, men in uniforms, men in suits, people who'd never worked the streets with her, people who'd never responded to a call with her, people who were reading reports and deciding what the truth was. She told them what happened. She'd seen a man being choked. She'd stopped it. She'd done what she thought was right. They asked her why she hadn't trusted Kwiatkowski's judgment, why she hadn't trusted the other officers on scene, why she thought she knew better than everyone else, why she'd taken it upon herself to interfere. She didn't have answers that satisfied them. She just knew what she'd seen. She knew what a chokehold looked like. She knew what happened when someone couldn't breathe. The hearings stretched across months. Carriol kept working. She went to her shifts. She responded to calls. But the weight was there. Other officers knew about the investigation. Some stopped talking to her. Some looked at her differently. Some whispered when she walked by. The union didn't help. They stayed quiet. They didn't defend her. They didn't push back. In May 2008, the department made its decision. Carriol Horn was terminated, effective immediately. She had 19 years of service. She needed 20 to qualify for her pension. She was 3 months away, 90 days. The department had waited. They'd stretched the investigation long enough that she couldn't hit 20 years before the decision came down. The termination letter was formal. It didn't mention the man on the ground. It didn't mention the chokehold. It didn't mention whether he'd survived. It said she had endangered a fellow officer. It said she had violated department policy. It said her actions were unacceptable. Carriol lost her job. She lost her pension. She lost her benefits. She lost her health insurance. She had no income. She had a family. She had bills. She had a mortgage. 19 years of work counted for nothing. Kwiatkowski kept his badge. He kept his job. He kept his pension. He kept working. Carriol had to find new work. She took jobs that paid a fraction of what she'd made. She struggled. The weight of it sat on her every morning, every bill that came due, every month that passed without the pension she'd earned. 4 years later, something happened. In 2009, Gregory Kwiatkowski was arrested. Federal charges. He'd beaten a suspect in a holding cell. 4 teenagers witnessed it. They saw him punch a handcuffed man in the face, again, while other officers watched. The case went to court. The evidence was clear. Witnesses testified. The jury convicted him. He was sentenced to 4 months in prison. The department finally fired him. But by then, Carriol had already lost everything. The conviction didn't change what had happened to her. It didn't bring her job back. It didn't restore her pension. It just confirmed what she'd known in 2006, that Kwiatkowski used excessive force, that he'd done it before, that he would do it again. She kept fighting. She filed appeals. She hired lawyers when she could afford them. She told her story to anyone who would listen, reporters, activists, community groups. She explained what had happened on Walden Avenue. She explained what it had cost her. The city didn't respond. The department stayed silent. The union didn't help. Years passed. The appeals went nowhere. The system had made its decision and the system didn't reverse itself. In 2014, another case emerged. A federal jury ruled that Kwiatkowski had used excessive force in the 2009 incident. The man he'd beaten received a settlement. The court acknowledged that Kwiatkowski had a history, a pattern, a documented record of violence. Carriol's case wasn't mentioned. The ruling didn't affect her. She was still without a pension, still working jobs that barely covered rent, still carrying the weight of being right when the system needed her to be wrong. She was in her 50s by then. The years had passed, the fight hadn't stopped, but the weight had settled deeper. Every month without a pension was another month she'd never get back. Every bill was a reminder. Every conversation where she had to explain what happened was another cut. The law said silence. The department said she'd been wrong. The other officers had moved on. Kwiatkowski was gone, but the decision stood. Cariol had been terminated for cause. That was the official record. That was what followed her. 2020 came. The country was watching what happened when officers used force. People were asking questions. What happened when other officers stood by and watched? What happened when someone tried to stop it? What happened when doing the right thing meant going against other officers? Cariol's name came up again. Activists found her story. Lawyers took her case. They filed new motions. They brought new evidence. They brought Kwiatkowski's conviction. They brought the federal ruling. They brought witness statements. They brought the original reports. The city was forced to respond. The department couldn't stay silent anymore. The case reopened. In April 2021, a judge reviewed everything. The hearing transcripts from 2007 and 2008. The termination letter. The original incident reports. Kwiatkowski's record. His conviction. The federal ruling, the witness statements, the timeline. He looked at what had happened on Walden Avenue 15 years earlier. He looked at what Cariol had done. He looked at what the department had done to her. He ruled that Cariol Horn had been wrongfully terminated. He said she had acted to save a man's life. He said the department had punished her for doing the right thing. He said the termination was unjust. He ordered her pension restored. He ordered back pay. He said she was owed what she'd earned. The department issued a statement. They said they respected the court's decision. They said they would comply. They didn't apologize. Cariol was 60 years old. She'd spent 15 years without a pension, 15 years without the benefits she'd earned, 15 years working jobs that didn't cover what the pension would have, 15 years carrying the weight, 15 years fighting just to be told she'd been right all along. The money came. The pension was restored, the back pay was calculated, the numbers were entered into the system, the department complied with the order, but the years didn't come back. After the ruling, Buffalo passed a law. They called it Cariol's Law. It required officers to intervene when they witnessed colleagues using excessive force. It said standing by wasn't acceptable. It said silence made you responsible. It said what Cariol had done in 2006 was now required. The law came 15 years too late for Cariol. But it came. The man she'd pulled Kwiatkowski off of survived that night in 2006. His name was Neil Mack. After the 2021 ruling, he spoke publicly. He said Cariol had saved his life. He said if she hadn't stepped in, he wouldn't have made it. He said he'd been dying on that pavement and she'd stopped it. She'd known that in 2006. She'd known it every day of the 15 years that followed. The law that carried her name was built on a simple idea, that watching someone die when you have the power to stop it makes you responsible, that silence has a cost, that doing nothing is still a choice. Cariol had made a different choice. She'd stepped forward when everyone else stepped back. She'd put her hands on another officer's arm and pulled him away from a man who couldn't breathe. It had cost her 19 years of work. It had cost her financial security. It had cost her a career. It had cost her 15 years of fighting. It had cost her the quiet retirement she'd earned. It had cost her the life she was 3 months away from having. The pension came back. The law carried her name. The court said she'd been right. The city acknowledged what had happened. But the cost stayed paid. The weight didn't lift. The years between 2008 and 2021 didn't reverse. The bills she'd struggled with didn't unhappen. The jobs she'd worked didn't disappear from memory. The nights wondering if the fight was worth it didn't erase themselves. She'd been 3 months from safety and lost everything for doing what the badge was supposed to mean. Sometimes the truth doesn't set you free. Sometimes it costs you everything you can't afford to lose. Sometimes being right just means you'll spend the rest of your life proving it.